Alright, I am back with another kind of an Outriders video, but it's sort of expanded past just Outriders into a more general topic I wanted to talk about. There's been a lot of debate kind of since launch that Outriders is or is not a live service game. People Could Fly was very adamant that it was not live service, it was not games as service. And then the game launched, and it sure feels like one in many ways, which has led people to kind of say that it actually is, and then they should have expectations that it'll perform like one. I think there are different angles to this where the things people are saying make up a live service game are not necessarily all universally accepted. Like, just because a game has patches and balances things, I don't think that alone makes it live service. And the more I thought about this, the more I realized that it's really not a binary thing. Like, there is no live service and not live service for each game. Like, there is a pretty wide gradient about how that works, based on kind of different elements your game has. And I tweeted this earlier, and what makes up a live service game to me, at least in the genre I cover here most often, are a few things. I would say it being online and multiplayer, usually, it having seasons and a roadmap for those seasons, so kind of rotating seasonal content, and then a roadmap that shows dates for when certain things are coming. Frequent balance or quality of life patches can be a factor. Like, if something is constantly trying to balance itself rather than just moving on. Like, a lot of single player games, they're not really gonna balance gun damage or something necessarily in the long term future here. But live service games will keep that stuff updated. Microtransactions, every game, practically has microtransactions these days, but a pretty hallmark of most live service games are that they have microtransactions, and I have seen some games try to declare that they are not live service based mainly on the fact that they don't have microtransactions. So that's something kind of developers use to claim that they don't have. If they don't have those, they're not live service, and I'll talk about those games a little bit later. For your paid DLC, obviously that is something that other games have. Like, free updates especially do seem like kind of live servicey things, because anyone can just jump back in and experience that. But also, sizable paid DLC is something that usually happens in most live service games that we see. It's getting less popular these days as more things go kind of free for additional content updates, but some games are sticking with that. Something like daily, weekly assignments in Destiny, that would be bounties, but a lot of games have weekly challenges and things that are meant to keep you coming back every week to build up currency or farm loot or whatever, giving you specific rewards for this being a live game and wanting you to play it long after you've beaten it. This is a pretty big staple of this genre, and a lot of games lack that, and so it's not really a factor for them. And then finally, live events. These are things like Genshin Impact is a new live event every week, practically. And then other games, we see a lot of games that do holiday events for specific holidays, which usually come with microtransactions. But sometimes it's, a new activity, new story content, things like that. I think out of that list, the more of those things you have, the more of a live service game you are. And the fewer you have, less so. So I kind of wanted to think about, where games landed. In coming up with this scale I came up with, I think we kind of have to separate out different genres. I know that games like Fortnite and Apex Legends and Warzone are live because they have seasons and they have content updates in the form of new guns, new characters. They might change the map every so often, but to me that seems like its own kind of separate genre entirely, where all PvP focused games are moving towards this live ongoing model, kind of by definition, especially in the age of the hero shooter. You're always going to be introducing new heroes, so that's just kind of something that happens definitely now, but I would separate that out from the games that I have here. And I would also separate out MMOs, which are kind of their own thing. I think MMOs are essentially the ancestor of the live service game. They're kind of the original live service game where you're supposed to log in and play all the time. This genre obviously kind of blossomed out of MMOs, and a lot of people would consider a lot of these games maybe MMO light, very light in some instances, but that is kind of where it got its genesis. But I would not include just straight MMOs, Warcraft, Final Fantasy, like on this list because I think that's kind of its own thing. So I will bring up my gradient scale here that I have to reference off screen. This is my live service scale. And this isn't every game I consider to be live service or not live service because that obviously wouldn't fit. So I had to kind of make some calls as to what I wanted to include and what I didn't. We'll start with what is a live service very clearly. That would be Destiny 2. That's pretty obvious to anyone that's played Destiny 2, and Bungie is very open about Destiny being a living, ongoing world. I think they have literally every single thing I mentioned on that list. I think it's the only game here that does that pretty much. They have constant content updates. There is usually something happening every single week. Maybe not some giant story thing or content edition, but there is a reason to log in every week. There are bounties. There is free content editions. There are paid content editions. They have holiday events. They have microtransactions. They have battle passes. I probably should have put battle passes on that list too. They have roadmaps. They have seasons. Like they literally have everything. And it's kind of the quintessential live service game that a lot of these other games tried to chase, for better or worse. We'll get to those. Genshin Impact, I think, is just one notch down. It is very, very live service. It is free, unlike Destiny, and all of its updates are free, and it is entirely reliant on microtransactions in the gacha model, but it has a ton of live events. There's live events pretty much every week, and they have they don't have seasons per se and seasonal roadmaps with exact dates all the time, but they do have their seasons are their patches essentially. So it'll be 2 or 3 weeks of gacha character cards, and then during that time there will be some sort of content update for 1.3 and then 1.4, and now we're looking towards 1.5 and they're previewing 1.5, and it's not called Season of Eula or whoever the new character is that's coming, but it is pretty much a seasonal model, and it is very similar, and it very much has daily login assignments, whether that's spending all your resin or doing daily quests that you're supposed to do. But there's longer term stuff that you can kind of log in and do whenever. One thing it does not have is paid expansions like Destiny, or paid seasons, or it does have a battle pass technically, but it doesn't have paid DLC because everything like that is free. So keep continuing to move on. The Division was Destiny's kind of main competitor for a while there. They've obviously scaled back on content for that, but it very much followed a live service model. They had seasons. They had maybe not weekly updates, but they had many updates based on new content they added to the game. They had cosmetic clothing events that were kind of tied to microtransactions, but also grinding. There are reasons to log in daily and things like that. And as we keep going, we get into the kind of games that were at least trying very hard to be live service games on the scale of these other ones, but are not there. Marvel's Avengers had a very clear plan to introduce lots of heroes, lots of new content very quickly. They are still doing all that stuff. It is just taking way longer. So it doesn't really feel like a live game. There are battle passes you can buy that don't expire. There are daily and weekly challenges and things like that. And now they're starting to ramp up with they're doing events every so often. There's this Tachyon Rift event thing coming pretty soon here. But what the problem is the actual content updates are very sparse, and when they arrive, they're not really live ongoing things like Destiny seasons. It's here's Kate Bishop and 3 hours of Kate Bishop missions and you're done. Or here's Hawkeye and here's 2 hours of Hawkeye missions and you're done, unless you want to grind them to your level 150. And so it's slowed way down, and I don't know what's going to happen past this first year. I don't know if they will be allowed to keep making content if they're not being terribly profitable. They're coming up with a big Black Panther expansion, which looks to be the most content they've ever added, but that is free. It's a free update, so they are only making money from microtransactions. Below Avengers, we have Anthem, which also very much was going to be a live service game and launched with a very specific roadmap, and then proceeded to miss pretty much everything on that roadmap to the point where they kind of just deleted the entire concept of roadmaps from the game, and it turned into very small updates periodically, and then the Cataclysm updates, and then that was kind of it. And they did random live events that like brought the Cataclysm back and stuff, but like it was clearly meant to be like an ongoing, unfolding story, but it just obviously did not work. They did not create the content fast enough. They did not give them a big enough team to support the game post-launch after its issues there, and they tried. I think if they threw the full force of BioWare behind this after launch, they probably could be in a different place today rather than Anthem being literally dead. There's some people joking that like, why is Anthem on a live service thing when it's dead? I'm mostly talking about like what it was trying to be rather than what it was or what it is now. Like, yeah, now obviously it's a completely dead game that they have announced they're making no content for, but you know what I mean. Like they were trying. Continuing to go, now we're getting into games that are like saying outright they're not live service, and yet clearly you can see them kind of in the middle of the spectrum here where the line's pretty blurry. Borderlands was very adamant that they were not live service. They were sticking with their, quote unquote traditional DLC model, and they were not doing microtransactions. And yet, I mean, Borderlands did 4 DLCs year one, which might as well be seasons, the equivalent of seasons. And they routinely have had free events where players can log in for a limited time and get unique loot and complete challenges and things like that. And now these days they even have something that's kind of akin to a battle pass. These like vault cards where you do daily and weekly challenges to level them up and get stuff from that. So it is very much live service. Like they can say that it's not, but it has almost all the hallmarks of this. And like just because you don't have microtransactions, like that is not the only thing disqualifying you from being a live service. Diablo 3 is kind of the progenitor of many of these, like the inspiration for Borderlands and Destiny and these other games and Outriders. And it wasn't like this at first, really. Diablo's always a game you can kind of grind indefinitely, but Diablo 3, instituted a ton of seasonal content, and I forget how many seasons they're up to now. It's like a couple dozen, I think. But they have these periods where it's like you build a seasonal character. They have like unique rewards from that. And well, they're missing a lot of these other aspects where like they never really added a ton of free content past there. They had one expansion, and then they introduced the Necromancer, and they had like a couple new maps. But they weren't exactly like pumping out new content for that, short of the seasonal stuff. So I had it slide a little further down the list here. Outriders is pretty close to being exactly in the middle here. It is not all the way, a full live service. So like I get what People Can Fly is saying in that regard. And yet there are many aspects of it that are very live service. The entire game is built for online play. They are constantly going to be balancing different builds and, patching probably some of the end game stuff in particular. They already did that through the demo. They have said that, if there is, quote, interest, they will also, quote, not abandon the game, which means, and they talked to me specifically about future content they make would be kind of significant expansion content. So I assume that might be something akin to, a Taken King, Reaper of Souls size expansion that is significant and also paid. But they do lack a lot of the signature live service things. They do not have like daily or weekly bounties. Like they're not encouraging people to like log in necessarily every day. They do not have roadmaps. They do not have dedicated seasons. So far they do not have live events. So they are lacking a lot of stuff that live service games have, and yet I think there is still also enough there where I don't think you could be like, oh, Outriders is totally different than Borderlands and Destiny and like The Division. Like it's similar. It's very similar, and even if it's a game that is not like making you play it like indefinitely because of constantly released new content, I do think this is a game that will have content updates to come in some form or another. And they do, obviously engagement is key, and they do want you playing it. I guess the difference here is a lot of the games want to keep you engaged in playing because they want to sell you microtransactions, and Outriders does not have those, and they have been very explicit about that, so I don't see them changing that now. So I do think there will be more of a drop-off for the Outriders player base because it is not designed... I don't think it's designed for medium-term sustainability. I think it's designed for short-term, where like people are probably going to... the hardcore people will put in 100, 200 hours to, making endgame builds and then stopping when they kind of run out of stuff to do. Medium-term, there's going to be nothing to do, but long-term, there's probably going to be like expansions and stuff, and they even said something about new classes. We'll see. So we can keep going down the scale. I added this to the one I put on Twitter, AC Valhalla. Ubisoft has been doing this a lot with a lot of its games. There are live service aspects in here. Like obviously they have microtransactions, but they also have content updates, and they have live events inside Valhalla. Like they had some sort of Yuletide something or another. Like I personally am not playing these, but I know that they are trying to keep the player base engaged for a longer period of time past just like a normal single player game where you would beat the campaign and move on. They're kind of like going halfway. Like they're not going all the way to full live service, but like you can very much see the live service influences there. As you keep going, Cyberpunk is, I mean, it's in a very unique situation by itself, but a lot of it does feel somewhat live servicey because it launched with all these things that kind of need to be kind of fixed or expanded upon. And then also we know that they're doing free DLC, and from what I've seen of the free DLC, it sounds pretty live service-ish to me, like adding a ton of cosmetics and then adding a bunch of smaller missions. I don't know how they're going to roll those out, like over what period of time, but obviously in they have like a content roadmap, things like that. And so it's missing a ton of the core live service things, but it is one of the single player games where it feels like the intent is to keep players playing it. In this case, getting people to come back because they promise they fixed X or Y thing now, but they are going to add new content that is going to get people to come back, and that will be free. Allegedly, they are still doing paid expansions sometime starting next year, but we'll see if that happens. So we're getting more towards the not live service side, but there are still aspects of Cyberpunk that feel live service-ish. Ghost of Tsushima I have in here because that's an interesting case where you beat the campaign and like you can literally clear the entire map and there was almost nothing to do. So you're like, okay, I'm done. Then Ghost of Tsushima comes out of nowhere and introduces this multiplayer co-op mode that is something you can grind, kind of for a while and log in weekly to do something akin to a raid and things like that. So it's kind of very separate, but they took like a live service component and tacked it on to a very not live service main game, which I found interesting. And then I think you get all the way at the end where you have just full single player standalone games. This is like God of War, like The Last of Us, like Uncharted, things like this that like are not multiplayer, are not really caring if you put a bazillion hours into it, or like, and you can't do that after the campaign for most of these. There's pretty much nothing to do other than mess around with photo mode or do a new game plus playthrough. These are games that no one would really even consider calling a live service, hence why they're on the not live service part of this way. Yeah. And that's, I have left some bigger names off here, like Warframe would obviously be somewhere in the live service half, things like that, Path of Exile, but this is just kind of they're the ones I play the most part because I don't know everything about like the Warframe content release schedule and how that works, but I understand that it is on here somewhere. It's just a lot of semantics. I think at first everyone really thought the narrative of like a big ongoing live world was really cool, and they were using that as a selling point. Then it got overwhelming, and all these games started to fail attempting to kind of replicate Destiny, and we got to the point where now not being a live service is also a selling point, which is where we got these kind of marketing campaigns for Borderlands 3 and now Outriders, where they are specifically saying like, no, we're not a live service, even though they're like, you're 50% of a live service at the very least. So it is kind of a matter of semantics, and that's just kind of my thoughts on the whole genre. And like, obviously this genre is my bread and butter. I don't know who's stomping around at my house right now, but it freaked me out. But yeah, so those are kind of my thoughts on the current state of the landscape here, and we will see who else is going to compete or not compete in this genre, but also really be competing. So we'll see what happens. And I hear Evie running. Evie, you coming to the office? There she is. Okay, you're just in time for your cameo because I'm wrapping up the video. Okay, and my wife is throwing balls at her. Perfect. Okay, all right. Thanks guys for watching, and I will see you next time.